So we had our first executive summit up in Boston, and that was my first summit that I've been to. And what I found was really interesting about it was that it had way more thought than I previously did with executive summits, because the output is very simple, right? A good executive summit output is something that's simple, concise, understandable, and is a sense of marching orders without being explicit. And as practitioners and as individual contributors, you hear this new direction and you're like, this is just a subtle, nuanced difference that we already knew. But what's the point in spending a whole couple days getting to that? And I think what I learned from that summit is that if it's like a tree, right, you're building a company in an ecosystem, you have roots in the ground, you have branches in the air. So what we were trying to decide is, should we move the trunk of the tree somewhere slightly differently? And if so, will the branches grow in that same direction? Will we be favoring certain parts? So really the three things that came out of that summit was, the positioning of LiftLab within the marketplace, right? There's a bunch of competitors who are coming out with, really cool things. There's a couple of internal messaging that we have to clear up, to make sure that we're explaining effectively to our customers. So a little bit on the positioning was one piece. The other piece is product direction. What are the more ambitious questions we want to answer? How do we want to not just be a tool that's used by the marketing team, but rather by the company? And how do we grow our product in such a way that will enable it to have even more use for more functions and more people within a business, maximizing, the return? Because with LiftLab, it's not just about the models, it's about the democratization of the model so that it gets used by people who are taking action in the organization. So if you have an agency team, a CMO, a CFO, a CEO, how do we make sure that this is a useful tool for them, that they could get their head around what's happening in marketing, what's happening in their advertising as quickly as possible? And then finally, it's the prioritization of which data sources, which testing, which possibly purchasing of other data can we do to make our signals even more robust. With models, it's really the quality of the data in. If you have great quality data, you have great output. If you have poor quality data in, you have poor output. So the question then becomes, how do we input more quality data as opposed to adding complexity to our model just to insert more opinions? Because if you're not adding more data and you're just using open source with your raw information, that's something that anybody can do. What I think is really the questions that people should be asking are, what are the other things you do to check how your model's working out? And that's outside of these packages and outside of this open source. Is, yes, you can do it, but is it accurate? Is it explainable? Is it overfit? Those are things that you need to examine. And those are the things that we're examining on the executive offsite, is how can we make sure that it's as robust as possible with all the leverage, all the additional data points that maybe you couldn't get on your own. So yeah, all that was boiled into just moving the tree trunk a little to the left or a little to the right. So when I was a practitioner and I'd hear that, I'd be like, well, yeah, no, duh, that's not a big deal. So really, I think the biggest learning that I had out of the executive summit is that shift, is that change.